This is Hannibal back here from the Hannibal TV on YouTube. Back again this week. One of the most intelligent people in the UFO community who was actually told by somebody this week associated with a famous ufologer that some of his concepts are too complicated for your average layman to understand. But I definitely am picking up a little bit. Somebody told me recently I'm the redneck ufologist, and I've understood bit by bit. But you're the author of Infinity Engineering. You have a lot of information, and you're actually going to tell us some new information today. The hot rod of the UFO world, right?
That's it.
Gene Sisco.
Finally, my wife, I bought it. She's like, "When are you ever going to wear that?" I said, "I don't know. The occasion will present itself sometime." And I was like, "Oh wait, now I got a place where it all comes together."
Now imagine talking to him about UFOs while he's doing some of the stuff he was notorious for doing
Some of
for
the
us.
shtick. I mean, my understanding was Piper was actually, a very intelligent guy.
Yeah.
Very inquisitive and like to study and that's what it's all about. I was telling you, before the show, I was not the best student in the world. I was not, nobody would have ever guessed that I would be, publicly trying to discuss physics and secrets of the universe and complex, advanced mathematical concepts and all of that. Um, and I tell people up front, I'm an intelligence guy, right? What's my strength is putting patterns together. I don't have to solve the math,
Right.
and that was the whole point in even releasing the book in the way we did. We went with a straightforward translation and issued an open invitation at the end of it, to the scientific community, the ufologist community, anyone who wanted to dive in and figure it out. That's what it was written for.
Have you heard about what's been being talked about a lot lately by people like Sean Kirkpatrick and NASA? They'll deny publicly aliens and extraterrestrials, but they'll be very careful not to say NHI because NHI, I guess, is the official term used for it. So as long as they don't say we have seen no signs of NHI, they're fine saying we've seen no evidence of aliens.
Yeah, the language is very important, and as obvious as it is, they still play with it conceptually, right? So we go all the way back to, the switch from UFO to UAP because they ran UFO into the mud and made anything that touched it, insanity. So we came out with UAP, and I see some people, have little campaigns, bring back UFOs. That's psycholinguistics, right? That is a discipline all into itself. And through my career, I obviously learned a lot about it because you'd read everything from witness statements and looking at the choice of words that people use. You see it in your relationships, right? In the simplest way, you tell your wife, you always do this, or she says you always do that, right? No, I don't always do it. I've done it. I do it quite often, but I don't always always do it. And in little ways, that's what happens. So I find the language choices that people use at different levels in government when they're talking about this fascinating. I've often theorized or thrown out there as devil's advocate. I said, we asked them questions about NHI, non-human intelligence. What if these biologics are technically somehow human, that they are a different variation of human, right?
Right.
Then should, the grand reveal come one day, they could say, well, we never lied. We didn't have any information about non-human intelligence. We had tons of information about a variation of humans who are intelligent. We had of a different genre of humans who are intelligent, but you never asked us about that.
Right.
And that's a lot of, I mean, it's actually a good segue, because that's a lot of what I want to talk about and kind of share with your audience, is about too, that from this research, which I'm excited about it now because it really came together with George Knapp's testimony and the publication of the documents that he submitted about this Thread 3 organization and structure. But I've been saying it for a couple of months now, that the mistake the community is making, the mistake that even Congress is making, is asking questions about UFO, UAP, NHI, because there is not going to be a file that has that name on it, probably in the deepest, darkest recesses of whatever it is that's buried. It's probably called something else, and it probably is very vanilla and relates specifically to some sort of aspect of science. And when I started looking at it that way and stopped looking at my father-in-law's documents as UFO documents, but as scientific documents, when I started extracting the science from it and then looking for the science in the government programs, declassified and active programs, and even contracts active today, contract solicitations. The science is all in there, and it's all scattered about, and it's all compartmentalized. And if you take it, extract it, and dissect it, essentially that, and this entire body of work that my father-in-law,
Let's see the cover again, and people can buy this on Amazon.
my father-in-law wrote, right? This unified body of work is spread out amongst 75 or so agencies and institutions.
The other thing I heard this week before we jump into your thing is that I guess one of the excuses they use that they can't talk about it is, for instance, it's considered nuclear technology under the classification of nuclear technology, and NASA, for instance, is banned from letting out public secrets of nuclear technology if they see one of these UFOs on their radar. It's not supposed to be public knowledge because of the type of radiation that these things emit, supposedly. Have you heard
Well,
about this?
yeah, I mean, that's what's fascinating, right? So we had two big things happen, or one big thing and one kind of suspiciously big thing. You had the redesignation of NASA from just a aerospace space agency to an intelligence type agency. So that again begins to offer all sorts of protections for documentations and whatnot. And then we saw the circulation of somebody who alleged that the DOE put out a directive for any records or files that specifically mention UFO, UAP, Immaculate Constellation, and the such. Again, I don't know how, if anyone's tracked that down to see how valid it is, but you raise a great point, right? Everything related to nuclear goes into the DOE. And that in and of itself has its whole, the Q clearances and everything that goes into that. And the assumption is because it has something to do with radiation, and perhaps the craft give off some kind of nuclear radiation and blah, blah, blah. So if I'm a lawyer in the courtroom, I refer you to the evidence that the engine that is specifically designed, described, and detailed by my father-in-law in the Soviet Union documents, it's specifically a thermonuclear engine system. It is a compact thermonuclear system with pistons come off of it and such, but it's what creates the energy, and it uses heavy water, and it goes through a process. So, it begs the question, right? If your concern is we have to protect you, anything to do with UAP, UFO, blah, 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 has to go the agency responsible for nuclear stuff because of either A, radiation, or B, you already know that these things use a compact nuclear reactive system, and that's why you want to get all the something about it has something to do with nuclear, so that's why you need to get it into the agency. So that in and of itself is almost a default admission.
Oh yeah, 100%. And it's all coming together. And you're right. I even heard Jesse Michaels talking about it this week and putting out a video about how NASA is being reclassified as a spy agency. So that's just very interesting. All
Yeah.
all the walls it seemed to be putting up. And even I heard Ross Coldhart put something out that they're very much deterring the media now for putting out anything that could have been given to them in a non-official way.
Well, right, exactly. I mean, so that's almost a little bit. I wonder if, again, George Knapp inspired, right? Because
Yeah.
he came back, he did what he thought was right with the majority of it. He brought it to the government. It seems to have wound up in Bigelow's lap for the most part, and Lord knows what he's doing and has developed out of it. And then what they didn't take, he just held on to and turned over. So again, it all seems to be falling in line. I liken it to this thing of you have a cheating spouse, right? And you're finding the receipts. You got the lipstick on the collar. Your friends are calling and telling you, where they are every 5 minutes and sending you photos and videos, and you're showing it to the spouse, and they're just gaslighting you and be like, no, you just don't understand. Oh, you're gonna ruin the surprise. Oh, I'm arranging a birthday party for you. Whatever litany of excuses are given during that. But we're kind of in that situation where we're chasing our spouse going, yeah, but what about this, what about this, what about this? And we're just not asking the specific question, are you fucking around or not? you know
And we got these Juggalo, let's say, Clam Posse fans on here. I am
Right.
having, by the way, for wrestling fans, Violent J, Vampiro, and James Storm on here soon to talk about JCW. But today we're going to be talking about this presentation you want to make regarding UAP. So let's get into it.
Yeah, so I thought, what might be interesting is to kind of run through everything. And the challenge in all of this is that it's so technical, right? And I come across sounding a lot smarter than I am because I've just basically learned this and learned the high points. But again, it's about the patterns. So if it's all right, I'm gonna go and share my screen so
Yes.
I can find my cursor.
So
And
you're
we're
going to provide us some actual documentation related to this and help it explain this.
That's it. I'm gonna try and walk through this step by step in a way that I hope begins to make sense. So, and I'll use my website not only for gratuitous
Yeah.
promotion, gratuitous self promotion. Let's see. How do I get this on here now? Is sharing a window. And the window's not coming up. Let me just stop sharing.
There you go.
All right.
Is that the
Oh,
right one?
nope. No, let me try it one more time. Share screen. And it's just going to run through them. Window, that, share. Oh, I see. I got to move it. I get how this works now.
Very good. And fans, if you have any questions for him as he's showing this, uh, we will try and get the answers.
All right. Somehow I've managed to make it. So here we go. So this here, and pardon me looking away, but I got it on the side screen. So this is the main site, engineeringinfinitybook.com. And so the first thing that I will just bring to everybody's attention on this is that the entire manuscript of my father-in-law's work, the entire body of work is here in this flip screen. It is free. You can explore it all day long, multiple times a day. And along with the original scans, then we have the translations. And some of, and for the most part, they are some summarized, some, verbatim, trying to, make it as readable as possible, because it's a dry read, right? We are looking at a brilliant physicist's private notes. He didn't put this together to publish. He didn't mean for it to be shared. He was a diehard loyalist of the Soviet Union. And our working theory is, at the fall of the Soviet Union, he stuck all this in his briefcase. So one of the things I'll point out here, this pinkish piece of paper, George Knapp talked about in his testimony the classification system and how he was able to get documents out of Russia. And he mentioned that, unlike what a lot of people might be familiar with in the US systems, in the Soviet system, they basically put a cover sheet on top of the documents, and everything underneath it was therefore classified. So all you had to do was take away that top sheet. This pinkish sheet is another system that they used for quick identification. So within whatever institution you worked in, different colored sheets might represent different levels of access. What this one specifically is, I do not know, but it is the top page of this. And the reason for that is, again, a lot of these systems are being observed by, the KGB, their versions of military police security officers. So it's a quick cue for a security officer. Somebody's carrying the sheet of paper on top of documents that signals to them, oh, that's something important. And then they would have a secondary means, either with the ID badge or whatever, that let them know, yes, that person's okay to be, excuse me, to be handling those documents. So, again, 294 pages of this stuff. And if you can imagine, as we were first going through the originals, looking through this, we're like, wow, this is kind of weird, kind of interesting. And it didn't take particularly long, as I flip through and hope I time it correctly, where we began to see stuff like that. And what the hell is that? And I remember right up in here, I was saying to Natalia, what's it say? What's that mean? And she's like, it's a UFO. Those three letters right there are the UFO. And it continues on and on that way. So that's a quick rundown of the book, the science. And so when we talk about the complexities of this and trying to translate it and understand it, hopefully that gives you some kind of insight that this is not a kitchen table, hobby. This was not, he was bored on a Wednesday night and decided to do Sudoku, of physics. This is, obviously a very structured, structured body of work. If I can even zoom in on here, oops, which let me go back real quick and try to find my control. Screw that. Oh, sorry, I'm making that more annoying than it needs to be. But just to point out, so things, the pages being hand numbered, this indicates the work number. So there's actually a body of 12 works amongst all the documents. This one here, obtaining the physical characteristics for the UFO propulsion system. You can see, again, the aging of the document up in here with the rusty old paper clip. I laugh at some of them, as you get really later on in them, they're yellowed. which resembles yellowing from like being in a smoke-filled room or stored in a cabinet. You go back to the 80s, 90s. You can just imagine everyone sitting there burning their sticks away as they sit and do advanced physics. So what I'll touch on now is really, like I said, what I think helped bring all of this together. And these are the translations and the papers that Knapp had submitted to Congress. And these first few pages are actually the translation of these next couple of pages here. And what these represent, these are the orders issued by the Ministry of Defense to the colonel that tells them what they want to do and lays out what the program's going to look like and which institutions, I should say, would be involved in it, and what are the areas of science that they want to look at. So just to walk you through, you have it with the Ministry of Defense. They want to look at the consequences of the manifestations of the practices of these anomalous aerial and cosmic phenomenon, that they want to collect the information. It goes into collecting physical evidence, physical pieces, and things like that. And then the correlations on phenomenon, research working mechanisms of the anomalous atmospheric and cosmic phenomena. So again, they're not saying UFOs. They're using much more technical terms, as it may be, and it goes into the years that these phase in. So now I'll go back again to my father-in-law and the years of this work. We initially assessed them as being written from the 80s through as late as possibly as 2000, but I really, narrow it down 80s to 90s, throughout the 90s, post fall of the Soviet Union. He talks about other documents that he'd submitted to the Duma, which is the Russian parliament, which would also indicate whoever's reading the document would be able to have access to the referenced documents that are in the Duma. So again, contextualize for the time frame. We can't sit there and think about there's no Freedom of Information Act and whatnot.
Did you meet your father-in-law ever when he was still alive?
Not personally. So
Okay.
I probably had 3 video chats with him. And nice enough guy. We laughed a lot because again, I'm fancying myself an American patriot. And even then he would articulate his case for why the Soviet Union needed to come back and how wonderful it was and all the rest of it. And I laugh a lot with Natalia, even as she's doing interviews and talking about her family life in the Soviet Union. And most of her family would say it was great. They gone on fine. There wasn't, she saw different from her friends, but as far as her family went, they were fine with everything. And I'd say to her, that in and of itself is a clue that your family, your father and his status were not normal. We're not average. But yeah, he was, the conversations I had with him, again,
Yeah.
normal father-in-law, son-in-law type stuff.
When we hear that, like, it's so much more open in Russia, is that just within the science and political and military communities? Because I've talked to a few Russian people associated with wrestling, and they've said that it's not necessarily public knowledge at all in Russia.
So it's accepted. I mean, I think Nat made a good case where in his testimony the government itself put the brightest minds and scientists on this project, and he described it as the largest UFO project probably ever in the world by a government. But what the average Russian might not realize is a lot of this is interwoven in policy and culture and history. So I think I've talked about it before on here too, that there is a thread that goes through the history of Russia, that has remained unchanged when it comes to, despite all the political changes. And it's this idea, some call it cosmicism, some call it the new sphere, but it is the system of education and society where there is emphasis on things like all of the STEM sciences, music, the arts, the performing arts. That's why it is not uncommon, like, for Natalia, she is, a brilliant pianist. She has a master's in IT engineering, specializing in robotics and artificial intelligence, and she's a world-class vocalist. Um, all of those sorts of things are vanilla. Every other person you meet almost, and particularly if they're educated in the sciences, you'll find has this sort of rounded background. And that is even Dr. Villarreal today, Beatrice Villarreal out of Stockholm, whose parents believe were Spanish and Russian. Um, she, is a musician herself and a classical, has a passion for classical music. So it's in that system. And in my father-in-law's documents, in the later parts, where he talks about the consciousness interfaces with the craft and this tripartite nature of human consciousness, you can see all of those themes being reflected in what the government's priorities are when it comes to um, culture and education and all of that. So while they might not talk about it on a day-to-day basis, I think there's still a lot of influence in there that they don't quite know about.
Okay. Thanks
To
for
give you a long
clarifying.
answer.
Yeah, well, it's good to know.
Yeah. Um,
They can't demand more information there like we can here either, obviously. So maybe
no,
that's why we don't hear about it.
the Supreme Court Justice Anthony Scalia, did a was testifying, I think, before the judiciary, and he talked about the constitutions of a lot of countries, and Russia's one of them, and the new Russian constitution, um, guarantees all of the same rights and even more, but they are paper constitutions, or parchment constitutions, he'd call them. They don't, have a judiciary that enforces them in the same way that we do, or reads them that way. So you're right, that becomes the challenge in all of this. There is so much that it would be great if Russia had a FOIA program, and we could expect to get something, to get actual answers out of it. But look at the freedoms we have and the results we get a lot of times with FOIA. So I'd imagine it
Yeah.
would be exponentially more challenging.
And as we just talked, it looks like it's gonna be cut off a little bit more.
Yeah.
And what happened originally, when they started allowing these FOIA requests, a lot of this UFO stuff was out there, but since they've realized these FOIA requests can happen, they don't, put everything in writing as much as my understanding. Is that correct?
I mean, that's right. That's all you have to do. Or
Because they
you
weren't expecting those to ever be public when those were originally written, right?
Sure. Well, because why? That discredited everybody to ruin almost. So who would dare, put their name on a letter and send it to the government, expressing an interest in UFOs? Be like a, one-way ticket to the loony bin back in the days.
And now we find out that there is an actual company working with Arrow to discredit people, which is insane.
Yeah, again, psycholinguistics wording, right? That title in and of itself, the off what was it, the undersecretary for information me or uh, public narratives or information
Yeah.
whatever it was, it sounded like, oh shit, I can't believe we have that. But what's the mission of the office? Oh, the mission of the office is to counter misinformation campaigns against the United States overseas. That's the or foreign influence trying to cause misinformation. So, information I don't think knows any nationality when they first start looking at it. So who knows where they at what point do they cut it off and say, "Oh no, this is something from within the company. Whoops, country. Whoops. Well, we already saw it. Maybe we need to just send it over to the FBI." Maybe
Yeah,
that's how that's how it works.
interesting.
You know, they clutch their pearls. "Ooh, didn't mean to see that. Oh well, I'll just give it to the bureau." That should be the end of it.
So this is still George Knapp's collaborating with your father, these files that he's put out?
Well, no, no. Well, so he didn't collaborate with my father-in-law
Oh,
at
I
all.
mean, like, you're collaborating them now,
Yeah,
or you're, like,
corroborating.
putting
Yeah,
them together?
yeah. So these are essentially the a lot of the details of what that goes into. And again, I'm not going to break it all down in this, but what I can attempt to do, and I don't know if it'll come up. Just give me a moment. What? Let me just scroll upwards. Oh no, you know what? This might be even better if I can get these in here. All right. So, like I mentioned, the body of my father-in-law's works are broken down into these 12 categories. And that's what, this is the basis. This gravitational charge dualism sort of expands upon the theory of relativity. He goes into UFO propulsion and material science, obtaining the physical characteristics, purpose to reverse engineer the craft's primary mechanisms. And you see things here like the neutrino flows, the MHD generators, and all the rest of it. So what we have out of, and I'm going to apologize because I want to make sure I express it correctly. So what we have between the Knapp documents and my father-in-law's body of work are 7 key corroborating areas, things that fit together. So you can think of it this way: the Knapp papers, these thread 3 documents, are the orders that come from the government detailing what it is that they want to look at. My father-in-law's body of work appears to be and supply the concrete engineering and structures for all of the categories of things that they're looking for and that they're talking about. And the different institutions play different roles. There's 7 or 8 institutions mentioned in the thread documents. So if you can imagine, you have the main order, you have a military unit that is tasked to go find and investigate and bring back materials. You have this group of subject matter experts to begin assessing whatever that information is, and trying to make it fit within known structures. So that's basically your choke point to say, no, we can explain this as atmospheric. We can explain this as a material nobody really knows about, some kind of composite, and down the line. And then you have the area that it appears my father-in-law was involved in, which was whatever couldn't be dismissed and remained anomalous is going to be engineered, reverse engineered. And that is what engineering infinity represents, in the sense of a complete craft, but every element of it, the from again from the trans from the construction of the drive to the propulsion and the power systems of it. Um, and then there appears to be a lab after that process, which then looks like a basic or a standard research and development. So they've reverse engineered it. Now, after that page, and probably where these documents were intended for, perhaps copies of them went to, who knows? I don't know. That is the organization that then begins the research and development of trying to actually get the thing to fly, that breaks it off into different components that feed into some of the systems we see coming out of Russia today, as far as plasma rocket systems and other kinds of advanced technologies. So yeah, so those 7 areas I had talked about. So the mandate and the mission match, the timing aligns. Again, the Russian program had a set period that was within those first sets of orders. That's not to say it didn't go beyond that. The institutions overlay. There was the program that was formerly known as SECTA, was SECTA AN, was broke up into 2 sections, a military component and the civilian component. My father-in-law would have been involved in the civilian component as a member of as a graduate of the premier academy within Latvia that fell under the Academy of Arts and Sciences, which all of these other institutions that are mentioned in the NAP structure fall as well. So I dove a little bit deep as well, because one that's mentioned is the Izmaran um, facility, Izmaran organization that studies radio physics and radio technology. So one of the other indicators that we have on this, we know my father-in-law prior to 86 had lived in what was called a closed military community, essentially a military base, but instead of actually building a base, they would just sort of take over a whole community or a plot of land and build a city there. And that was in Priazursk, Kazakhstan, which again, like Area 51 and many other places associated with UAP UFO phenomenon, is popularly known for rocketry and all of that. But this Izmaran organization would have been closely associated in Priazursk, because Priazursk also was a center with the missile programs for these things, radio physics and radio technology. Uh, Mentioned again the phenomenon and the methods of investigating that, looking at the vehicle architectures, testing and program flow, and then the impacts on their existing technology. So, what you essentially have, again, not to overly repeat myself, but just try to put it, in context. We've got the orders, we've got the areas they're supposed to be studying, we've got the organizations that align, of which organizations are studying it, and then we have this body of work that slips right in to each one of those components. Now, to move that on, let me see if there's anything else here.
So are those bases fenced off in Russia, or people just don't dare go near them?
Yeah, they're usually kind of remote, so they're, not necessarily, it's not like in the US we're used to there's a sign and then you're in another town already and it doesn't look much different. There is considerable space, so they are like outposts and things like that. And they
Okay.
would have in periods of times, they'd have the roads closed off and guards posted, and so it was a base for all intents and purposes. They just called them, military cities. And when they close it, they just remove the guard shack, and regular people, are able to move in here. But as we were talking about early, Hannibal, right here, the physics, this entire work focused on the physics of thermonuclear synthesis and how that works. So that goes to what we were pondering earlier. Why is it that the Department of Energy would suddenly seem to have a worry about there being nuclear components of, and this
Yeah.
shot actually is some of the combustion
And they
process.
have their own, as it's been documented recently, they have their own teams that come out to some of these alleged crashes too, apparently, that will even subdue regular military, apparently.
Yeah, a lot of those are contractors. Listen, military will subdue military. When I worked with nuclear weapons security in Germany, so I was a controller. So my controller slash desk sergeant, you'd call it dispatcher. Even my responsibility. I sat in the building. I dispatched the forces wherever they needed to go. Conducted the exercises and all the rest of it. Had to plot everything for disaster response and whatnot. I had a counterpart that was sitting next to me, whose job it was to monitor the vaults where the nukes were kept in. Both of us had a redundant facility, or at a redundant facility, there were two people watching what we were doing. So there's another controller there, and there was another alarm operator there. If the alarm operator didn't respond correctly within the right amount of time, my job was to jack him up, challenge him, get him out of there, get somebody new in the seat that was qualified. If both of us seemed to be screwing off, the redundant facility's job was to send a response team to get us. So yeah, whether they're civilian contractors or other military people jacking up other military people, they will do it all the time when it comes to handling nukes.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So I guess what we can move on to, we're doing all right on time. There any questions out there or anything? I haven't been watching.
Not yet.
Okay.
Just comments.
All right. Any of them trolling on me yet?
No.
Oh, that's cool.
Your wife donated $1.99, so that's nice of her.
Listen, first as how can I say it? As thrifty as she is, that's quite the accomplishment.
Oh, there you go. That's what you want in a wife.
She's absolutely wonderful. Now, let me see. I think I just deleted one I wanted, so bear with me one moment as I try and bring up.
Was she already in the U.S. when you met her?
No, I met her while I was actually over in Latvia. Interestingly enough, I was working on a project that involved NASA.
Okay.
I was involved in a company that had some that did tracking technologies, and there was an application that NASA was interested in that involved the space station. So every now and then I'll have on a blue shirt that has the mission patch, because we as the company were involved in testing it in their underwater habitat off the coast of Florida. And so it's called NEMO, NASA Extreme Environment Mission Operations. So I got the shirt for that, as they say. Been there, done that. Got the T-shirt.
How long were you based there for?
We probably worked on the project a little over a year.
Okay.
And so I was actually in the US, but as it was getting ready to be deployed and looking at, an actual application on the space station, we needed a lot of data centers. And Eastern Europe, again, I had a whole career there and was already quite familiar with about, just about everything that was around. So while I was over there, I went and was looking for tech companies and cloud storage and the like to work with. And in the course of doing that, Natalia was working her day job, and she was the only one who spoke English. She's obviously easy enough on the eyes, and the rest, as we say, is history.
Yeah, the women from that area of the world are notorious for being very beautiful.
Yeah, she
Oh, there she is. Oh, she wanted to donate more, but well, yeah, well, I appreciate anything.
tell her she can give it to me, Hannibal.
Yeah, there you go.
I'll get to you, buddy. Trust me, bro. Right?
Does she cook for you guys? And I know I'm getting off topic there, or is it you that does it?
She spoils me rotten. I mean, I'm a disabled vet. I have some mobility issues and things like that, and that have really just sort of gotten worse over the last year and a half or so. But she is a tremendous cook. I love, the Eastern European foods and everything else, and so she's always doing that. And you can take a look at me, Hannibal. I'm not lacking for a meal.
No, you got the biceps going, so you're still heading to the gym here and there. I see.
No. Those are still lingering. They were so huge to
Oh,
begin with. They just won't deteriorate. that's that's at least my story. So, all right, I got things uploaded here. I'm trying to figure, it's how to get it in there. It seems to be. Oh, there we go. All right. So now I've got this up here, and I'm going to leave it here just because
yeah.
it's
I don't know why it's faded a little bit, but you can see it.
oh, okay. Stupid me. I should have left it on my screen and just open it up there. So if we get back to the anchors of all this, as we call them, right? We just ran through the Soviet program and that background and how the technology aligns to that. So check the box. So what began happening with me as I was thinking about this, and I was talking about earlier when it comes to FOIA and these requests and asking about UFOs and UAPs. And there was a story that came out probably back in June when I was inspired to do this about what's her name, Susan Goff over in the Pentagon. And my understanding of it is, any agency that got anything about requesting UFO, UAP type information for FOIA should be directed to her. And I think the Black Vault guy had been, in court over it and all the rest of it. And it was literally like a 2 a.m. wake up. He said, I do say that. It's literally like a 2 a.m. wake up when I thought about it, and I said, well, why are we asking about, why do we have to ask about UFOs, UAPs? Let's just not do that, right? I've got 240 pages of science that I can go ahead and ask about. And so the first thing I did was I generated 4 FOIA requests. I extracted the main science out of the book, and I sent one to NASA, one to the Navy, one to the Air Force, and one to Sandia Labs. And like I said, it was at 2 o'clock. So it was like 2 o'clock on a Sunday morning that I had done this. And in those requests, I had looked at the scientific domains, which agencies cover those domains, and then extracting the specifics of the book, asked questions about those, or made my FOIA request based on that. That was the weekend. Within one business day, Monday, if not first thing Tuesday morning, the Navy responded back, and the guy who responded copied in 4 other people asking, do you want the stuff that's easily releasable, or do you want more of the research? And I just kind of replied, well, just send me more of the whatever is easily releasable, because it was basically an exercise in what I thought was going to be an exercise in futility, based on everything I heard and was hearing from people about the length of time that it takes to get a response for anything from FOIA. But the Navy seemed like, boom, they were ready to send whatever it was on these, again, scientific domains. And the same day NASA responded. And NASA responded saying, "Oh, you're asking about this stuff. Your request is improperly formatted, and we are closing the case." Within one business day. So anyone that's done anything with FOIA requests, you tell me, because everybody else I mention it to, says that's, seemingly unheard of that it would close out, but it, kind of made me feel like I struck a nerve um, in asking what I asked. The Air Force and Sandia Labs, that was back in June. It's September. They still haven't even. I've heard nothing from them.
Right. And that's what we always hear about the Air Force. They're staying out of it for now.
Yeah, I mean, and again, that was asking, nothing, not one mention of UAP, UFO, nothing like that. Gene comparison to George's timeline. Well, I guess the comparison to George's, I don't need to bring anything up on that. So George talks about going to the Soviet Union in 93 initially, and that's when he came back. He said with the all of those documents, and then by the time he returned in 96, nobody would talk to him or go near him. So the the works themselves are not dated. They don't have a date on them. So I was left to, investigate and extract clues that I could out of it. So I started out, with my father-in-law himself. He was born in 1958, which means by 1978 he was 20 years old, which means he probably started college sometime 1976. 76 to 80 is when he would have been in school. These programs begin. So in George's documents, it talks about 86 to 94. I'm just checking my notes here quick. And then advancing into the 90s. So those, barring anything else I see, so we're looking at the 80s, 86 to into the 90s time frame of George's documents primarily. So again, family, you've got to have a little leeway here. Family history and family knowledge plays into this a lot too. So after graduation, roughly around 1980, from 1980 to sometime before 1986, sometime between 80 and 86, this is a period when we know the SECTA program, the joint program between the Ministry of Defense and the Academy of Arts and Sciences, was formally established. And that's when they were inside the universities and looking at people and pulling people out and doing their things like that. We know, again, friends and family, that period of graduation, post-graduation, he was no longer living in the dormitories with anybody. He had a private apartment, off campus. He wasn't involved in the academic community. And to give you some context, for instance, my wife Natalia, in 2012, she was accepted into the Latvian Academy of Music, their Juilliard, so to speak. The conductor for the Boston Symphony Orchestra graduated the same program. There were 12 people in that class. So, the university systems, particularly during the Soviet times, were not these, several hundreds of people. Everybody that was in there and in these specialized programs were, number one, top students to begin with, because the government was paying for it altogether. And so it was highly selective of who got into the programs to begin with. And they were tightly controlling, again, the workflow, the work distribution. And so wherever there was the need, those would have more people. Where it was more specialized, it was more specialized in those class sizes as well. In my father-in-law's documents themselves, he references dates in history. He talks about, again, events throughout the 80s and 90s. He references the documents he sent to Duma, the Russian parliament, between 91 and 96. He mentions, he writes in there about 2007. So that's the time frame of what I have, my father-in-law's document. These documents, the threads again fit right in there. 86 to 90 is specifically what's there. Nap was over there in 93. By 96, Russia had gone through the first part of the transition from the fall of communism and the new Russian Federation, as it would be, from the USSR. So you had about 5 years of Yeltsin in there, reorganizing the structures and all of these systems that were scattered amongst all the satellite nations beginning to fall back in line with whatever was going to fall back in line at that point. If that helps answer that question.
Yes,
So
that was a very detailed answer.
I know I go on and on, but I feel like it's it's so important in so many ways. And again, it's a lot of it's about context and a lot of it's putting these pieces together. So quickly I'll touch on, because I've already alluded to it, if I can get it up and running again, if I can
Which
figure
one
it
is
out.
it?
Yep, these here.
Okay.
So again, the process I went through was to say, the best place to hide something's right out in the public. So I took these scientific domains. All in all, there were 52 of them that I extracted from the works, and I began searching through whatever was publicly available about U.S. government programs within each one of these domains, and they all came back to the average. Or the regular suspects, as we say, right? Our DARPAs, propulsion labs, NASA, now getting into Space Force. This chart, actually, Hannibal, you inspired this chart because you asked the other day about, you shot me a message asking about Sancor and their
Yeah.
contracts. And that made me think, oh, yeah, I never looked at, contracts. What's out there, right now? Are they still doing this research? I had looked at the periods of 1980 to 2000. During that period, I found, correlations 85 to 95% of the work of my father-in-law's work, body of works, I found within US government programs the exact science during the exact same period of time, being investigated. I expanded that to 2025. By 20, there was an exponential leap, really, from 1996 through 2025 in spending. So that first 20-year period, they spent a total of about 15 billion. So 1.5 billion a year. Then after 96, which we kind of, if you, again, it's a good point, even to bring up in regards to, Knapp going back over there in 96 and now no one would talk to him. Well, because there was so much brain drain, as I call it, that emigrated out of Russia and the former Soviet Union, came to America. A lot of these people wound up in key DoD departments and things like that. And so from 96, 2000 through 2025, we go from 1.5 billion a year to about 15 billion a year that you see, 10 times increase, exponential increase in exploring all of these same bodies of science. This chart up here, I went through what I could find that is currently out there right now for solicitations related to the exact same science. And there's I might be looking at the wrong chart. Where are we at? Yeah, so we're at about a little bit over 500 million there. And if I can get this to go to the next slide. Oh, there we go. And here you can see, so this is the domain by domain correlation, and this will mean a lot of nothing to most people, but these MHD propulsion systems, this is magnetohydrodynamic propulsion, a lot of it on the surface. The Navy does a lot of this, how to make submarines less friction and whatnot. But you see DARPA, Tesla has some money in there, and I'm squinting because I forgot my glasses. But this was interesting. Again, the 90% of the targets matched my father-in-law's work, the numbers he came out with. So 40 years ago, this guy writes the ideal numbers that are needed for this UFO craft MHD propulsion system. He comes up with a number and says, well, this is the number that, the craft needs. And 40 years later, the government is still issuing contracts looking for maximum, efficiency targets that match them in 90% of the contracts that they're putting out there. And that's, essentially how the rest of this flows. Thermonuclear fusion, we've got that again. Plasma containment, this gravitational charge dualism. This is really the crux of the entire body of work. This is, according to my father-in-law, the thing that allows UFOs to fly and do all of the things that they do. And this is fundamentally an expansion and a building off of the theory of relativity. Somebody once described it, and there's a lot of similar theories that are out there now and similar challenges to relativity itself. And somebody described it, they said they were like, your father-in-law either reverse engineered a UFO or he's just prophetic. He's just a prophet. In consciousness research, so those, as you see, handle things like Stargate and the gateway process, nothing currently that we see there. But over the course, and I think between 86 and 2000, if I remember correctly, there was a 56% match between the elements of consciousness in my father-in-law's work, which he described as the tripartite nature of consciousness, and that being important because the craft itself has an interaction with consciousness. So again, 80 through 2000, you've got about 56% of the match between what he describes and what we're able to pull out from public records like the Stargate and Gateway process, witness testimonies, and all of that. You've got that, and then as you go deeper, it's lower does that mean lower correlations? That doesn't necessarily mean they're not doing it. Doesn't mean there's not an interest in it. What it does mean is that if there is existing programs and documentation, those are probably still buried deep within SAP somewhere. I think, we've had testimony from witnesses, and if you remember, any particular where they talk about this, but I think it's why we also see more talk about psionics. We're seeing the CE5 stuff come out. We hear, a lot more acceptance and attempting to mainstream these episodes or skills, let's say, between remote viewing, psionics, CE5. If you are or are not a fan of Greer, I guess, all sort of fall in that category.
Have you seen the latest thing that came out from News Nation this week of that former military guy putting out all these videos that seem, I don't know, it's very weird.
Yeah. It is, and so my, what was my gut reaction? My gut reaction was like, hold on a second. They told you to put the dog away, and then they break into a game of intergalactic charades, and they don't kind of telepathically tell you anything anymore. They're just, holding up heads and making movements that look like symbols that are on rocks and things like that. So that was my gut reaction. But, I stepped back and, I don't know if it's the effect of, again, living with this body of work for so long, or it's getting old and mellowing out and just wanting to give people the benefit of the doubt sometimes, in a lot of this. I look at everything through that frame. Listen, people, that's a bold, if you're a liar, that's a bold move, right? that is just a bold move to put that video out there if you know it's bullshit. And I cannot imagine, if you've spent 30 seconds in this community, it is somewhat unforgiving, if not skeptical, if not just friggin' mean, to anything that doesn't fit within what people think already have in their mind with their narratives, right? I go through it a lot with this. People say, well, this is how I think it works. And I say, well, actually, hold on, let me pull out a page of physics for you that isn't even, I'm not even disputing what you're saying. I'm actually trying to give you something that helps reinforce. It's like you're right, and here's something that solidifies, what you're right about, and here's what you're wrong about. And even looking at it in black, white, red, and blue, handwritten, notes that's correlated to Soviet, official programs, they still want to be like, yeah, but I still think, okay, I can't help you at that point. But yeah, so I didn't want to be so dismissive of it. And, I think of it in the context of, maybe they are trying to communicate, and maybe we just don't understand, and they're trying to find a good way to do it. And we're just not there yet when it comes to consciousness and our own abilities to be able to decipher. I mean, they're,
Yeah.
we can't assume they come down knowing English in every language. And, I
Or
mean,
is it even someone just playing a trick on from special forces? Because we've
maybe.
also heard cases aliens can freeze dogs, right? That they freeze them so like they'll stop moving.
If you put it all together, if you put all the reports together, what does it sound? My second reaction was like, the more I hear about NHI human interactions, the less impressed I am with NHI, right? Because it's all over the place. It is everywhere from from intergalactic, graphic hand signals,
Yeah.
and rocks and crop circles, to telepathy, to
To getting raped.
you're right, to getting gang raped, to being shown all the secrets of the universe, to being astral projected and brought to intergalactic meetings inside the hollow moon with, spiritual and light beings. And I'm like, what a fucking chaotic mess, especially if there's supposed to be a galactic federation heading this all up. So, I just chalk it up to, it's a piece of information that is out there. Let's see what else develops.
Yeah. So I don't know. As you said, it just seems very bizarre that
And I
that
mean,
is what
maybe
they did.
we just don't understand what they're trying to say and how they're trying to say it.
Right.
You know, we have people in our own homes that we have problems communicating with, right? Be it a spouse, a relative, um, a
And you're gonna
child.
be in Vegas next week.
Going to be in Vegas next week.
Let's make the announcement now.
That's it. That's it. There's going to be there's an event going on out there, and we're going to pop in and say hello. And I understand my buddy George Knapp is going to be there, so I hope to catch 5 minutes with him. I'm sure it'll be quite a surprise to him if he doesn't see this before then. If he does, we'll see if he's there and says hello. Be happy to grab a cup of coffee afterwards too, if he'd like.
Very good. So for that, well, just to finish up on that Ross Coulthard guy,
Yeah.
where it's like almost lights are being projected. It almost seems like with these aliens, I don't know. But like would you wouldn't put that in the same category as like the grays, right? They were trying to allude that these could be mantises.
I mean, honestly, I don't know enough about any of that, right? You got to remember, I have literally been in this community since June 11th. It's September 21st. So I'm on what? I'm like on 110 days that I have been like involved in this, so I see all the things, 7 species of aliens, and listen, it's fascinating. I don't know. All I know is I had this shit dropped in my lap. People talk about they want answers. I have, we have invested years now, 4 years now in translating this and publishing it and setting all of this stuff up. And again, publishing it for free in flip books, that are right online, that people can go to and reference, um, because it seemed everybody wanted answers. And the more we worked on translating it, the more I tried to disprove it. The more firm I got in, wow, this is really a thing. And it seems, like it reflects what's going on in the government. And I mean, we can, start trying to wrap it up here, for the next 10 minutes or so. Um, so, I try not to get distracted. I spent a lot of time when videos came up trying to use the book to explain them. Like, okay, well, this is an explanation of why it is. Again, people just like to throw out their own theory. As I say, the facts, though interesting, are irrelevant, it seems. They just like to, chase, be dogs chasing tires. So when they catch it, can't wait to see what they do with it, where they go with it. Yeah, I'm a little bit of a critic, and I try not to be unkind, but my ass burns a little bit. Over the last 4 years, I sit and reached out to the who's who of this community, everyone that screams about they're an advocate, they're a champion, they're an expert, and all the rest of it, and have gotten silence, silence. You can see in the timeline that I posed about my trying to reach out to folks and communicate and just have a discussion. I don't need to desire to be a celebrity. I didn't need a day job, Hannibal. I'm retired. I've done my thing already. I feel a responsibility to this as a family perspective. You asked earlier about my father-in-law and all that, and I say all the time, I think we've learned so much more about him as a man than Natalia even knew. And in those time that I knew him, and what I knew of him was, yeah, he was a once brilliant guy. The Soviet Union fell apart. He lost his shit, hit the bottle, and sometimes sleeps on the floor and won't wear new clothes because he only wants clothes from secondhand shops, and could get nasty, when he was drunk, and all the rest of it. And as I dove in all of this and thought about it, and I said, if this is what was in this guy's head, and he knew these secrets, right? He knew about NHI, and again, Nat will tell you, yeah, he'd talk about, yeah, UFOs are real. He wouldn't say, oh, I'm working on them, but he was adamant, he knew all of it was real. And if he was walking around with all this knowledge in his head, the country that he believed so much, everything he believed in, was the communist ideology, that disappeared overnight. You've worked on this stuff for 15, 20 years, maybe. And then, where do you go to work next? What do you go do? What do you explain? How do you explain to people, never mind, the fact you were a senior, a respected person within and connected to all the senior levels of the Communist Party, in that time and a little bit afterwards, and being in Latvia, they wanted nothing to do with you. Oh, I'll answer that in a second, Donnie. That's a really good one. I'll give you a good theory on the good idea about that. But and then I look at myself and veterans and people, that who have spent their lives in the service of the country, as Americans, first as a veteran, as a contractor, and everything else. And the number one thing they talk about veterans struggling with when they get out is not having a mission anymore. And when I thought about my father-in-law in the same way, He was a patriot. He was a brilliant man. He was a patriot, and the rug was pulled out from under him. And then he became a man without a mission. We see it in our own veterans and the like. They wind up burying their sorrows in a bottle, pills, or whatever else. So that that part of him, I have a lot of empathy for now, and a whole new respect for, because I know how nutty I can be sometimes living with this, like I said, over the last 5 years. To have created this, I can't even imagine. Total disclosure reunion today, yeah. So if I got time, Hannibal, I can
Yeah,
dive into.
we'll let you get Donnie's
All right.
Chernobyl.
So here, again, another unpopular opinion, and I know Ty Roberts from Total Disclosure is watching, and he is a big champion, and I will state his position. Hopefully, I do it well. Of the idea that the relationship of the interactions between UAP and nuclear facilities is, another one of these signs and symbols. They don't want us, messing around with nukes, and they're trying to, give us a message that, we shouldn't be messing around with them and all of that. I have a less sexy idea about that, and it's based a little bit on the research that I've done around that. There seem to be the majority of those instances happening from the 1960s and the Bob Salas Maelstrom reports and incident through I think 2010ish, and I noticed from 1986 on, there seemed to be less interference and more observations reported. So if we look at Jeff Nusatelli from the UAP hearings, former Air Force cop, same job I did. I just did it a little bit earlier. They're observing, but there doesn't seem to be any interaction, any interruption of the nuclear facilities. Whereas before 1986, that seemed to happen a whole lot. After 1986, I think it happened like once, maybe, maybe twice if you count, Russia and the incident where they turned everybody into stone, all the security forces. So 86 is when Chernobyl happened.
Which
And
is what I was bringing up for the dog. Why
Yeah.
can they sometimes turn people to stone and animals and others not? But
Yeah, there you go. So, I did read that there were some ancillary reports about UAP that were in the area. Ukraine, of all the former Soviet republics, Ukraine traditionally, I think, has a large number comparatively. So whether, again, that's based on population density, more eyes in the skies in more places to see them is a possibility. And so there were reports around Chernobyl, and I think there was some reporting, particularly over reactor 4 of a UAP. And so the hypothesis, the question I have in my mind, and given the opportunity, I guess it would be more interesting to dive into it more. Were the instances where UAP interfered with nuclear systems more a clash of technologies? So if you can imagine, they're trying to understand what we're doing, and they kind of use their Bluetooth or Wi-Fi to trickle down and see what they can extract from our systems. And because our systems are analog and stupid compared to theirs, it causes some interference, and things turn on and things turn off and all the rest of it. And if we, follow that and apply it to Chernobyl, they're doing their download, buttons and buzzers are going off and whatnot, and things aren't functioning correctly. And the human response starts turning buttons and twisting things and boom, there's a major disaster, and they suddenly say, you know what, let's not do that so much anymore. Let's just basically observe from now on. Is that the reason there's less of them? Chernobyl theories, UFOs may stop some of the radiation. Yeah, I mean, again, maybe they were part of the cause, maybe they were part of the cleanup crew. But I think the main thing, the main takeaway is, for some reason, after 1986, there seems to be much less of those types of reports happening, as opposed to after 86.
And do you think that's because they're just not letting it out, or they're actually working with the governments more now?
So it could be a couple, it could be a couple of things. And I think it's why they won't have a Bob Salas testify. I think that is why you will never see, or they cannot put a witness that, of a stature, again, a commissioned officer, a commander of a missile complex. You can't put him in front of Congress and talk about something that has threatened the safety and security and stability of the nuclear stockpile, right? Because you not only get into the domestic problem of that, you get into a lot of our nukes aren't in the United States. So then we start having problems with allies. Then we have to start explaining, well, we've taken measures that prevent that. Well, hold on. If it never happened, how did you take measures to counter it? Or if it did happen and you took measures to counter it, how do you know exactly what was done in order to counter that? And to try and clarify it even more, I took, like, the craft my father-in-law describes, and I researched, and there are like 6 particular programs since the 80s that the US developed that could specifically defeat the technology as it describes in the craft. So if you talk about origins, and that's really the fundamental message out of all of this, is for Congress, we need to ask better questions. It is out there, this, you could take this type of work, correlated work, and you could have, heads of 75 agencies, institutions, and contractors, and asking them specific origins and genesis questions of research and development technology. What was the origin? What inspired us to research this? What came of the research? What did we do with, who was the end customer, and what did they do with the product of that research? Because, you can either go down that trail and get an answer, or if the answer stops at, oh, we it was somebody's idea, and we spend millions of dollars just exploring somebody's random idea. Illogical, and it's all of those things is why I think it becomes a political minefield for them to put somebody like Salas on, under oath in front of Congress, because even the answers to what they fixed, how they knew what to fix, opens up a whole new line of questioning nobody wants to answer. And that's why I say, from, when I started in the intelligence world, my first boss, posed this question. He said, you see a turtle on a fence post in the middle of a field. What do you do? And my, reaction was, I'm trying to solve the mystery right then and there. I'm trying to figure it all out and identify threats and whatnot. And he stops me. He says, no, you just need to know something's fucking wrong. And from that point on, you have that in your mind, and every step you take, and every person you meet, and everything you see after that point, you look for those signs and signals that explain why that turtle's on that fence post. And you put that together. And intelligence isn't about prosecuting a case, right? We use the word investigation in so much of this, like we're going to present it to a judge and prosecute it. in our situation in the UAP community, we're investigating and trying to prosecute a case before a judge that has no interest in hearing this case whatsoever and just wants to get you out of there as quickly as possible. So, maybe he throws you a breadcrumb of a video to talk about for the next 6-7 months ad nauseum, and then talk about what everybody talked about the video on another thing. Whereas I think this is an open source intelligence, project that we're looking at. And when we start getting into numbers like I have, where, I have, 90-95% direct correlation of science, but, of a unified body of work detailing the reverse engineering of a UFO that's corroborated by documents somebody else got, who I've never even met or spoken to, got 33 years ago, in Russia. The the odds of that being coincidence that they would match are beyond numbers. 1 in 5 billion. I think I came up with, running some of that math. So that's a hearing. That's a hearing when you can have numbers, budgets, and specific programs to ask about, and specific science to ask about. Because, like I said, I think chasing down this, here's a code name, tell us about it. Well, I don't know nothing about that, is much different than, okay, explain to me why, between this time period you were studying, this, magnetohydrodynamics. Oh, well, it's a very common thing. Yes, but you were very specific that you needed it to get to that number. Well, yes, that's an optimum number. Based on what? Where'd you come up with that being an optimum number?
Were you in the IC?
Yes, 17 years.
There you go. Just a few follow-ups. What do you think about the response for Salas's, who I have interviewed? Bob Salas on the Hannibal TV. Anyone could look that up. Was it a chain transformer failure rather than UFOs?
No idea. I don't know anything about that case other than Bob Salas was a commander. Some UFOs showed up, shut some shit off.
And he also claims in my interview that he had a direct contact experience at his home in later years. And Sharon also had a quick question here. Do you think that they're going to protect us from a future potential nuclear event?
Do you think they may in the future that they may be here to protect? I lean towards the side that I hesitate to project our value system and our emotions and things like that on something that we don't know about, that on some other form of intelligent life, that they would have a culture, a moral system, priorities that would be formed by the environment in which they live and have their society. Are they here to protect us? I mean, again, maybe not. Yes,
There's a lot of horrible stuff going on in the world, especially African areas, all the time, and they don't do anything.
Right. Look at how we treat one another.
Where were they for all the Hitler stuff before the bomb was dropped? I mean, they were paying attention all along, weren't they?
Right. And I can go down that rabbit hole, just like, and talk about the communication.
We'll save that, I guess, for another time.
Yeah. I mean, it's also, all of those scenarios are, each one is as chaotic as the other if you try to lump them all together. All of the things everybody knows, if you lump it all together, it's a big friggin' ball of chaos that, then I say, well, I'm not all that impressed with NHI if this is how they're organized and what they're doing.
Do you think some of these figures, like a Hitler or an Elon Musk, or some of these like real special characters, I think Leonardo da Vinci too, could be like hybrids of some type because they really seem to have like superhuman abilities in various ways?
I think, again, and I go, what I think is based upon my father-in-law's works. And in those works, he talks about this tripartite nature of consciousness. And, the short of it is that consciousness is a tuner, right? Consciousness, our individual consciousness is the channel we're dialed into. And we have little overlaps with one another. And sometimes our signals and our tuners align and we like each other. Sometimes we are on opposite ends of the spectrum in frequency. And that's why you can just look at somebody and not like them, having never said one word to them. So, in the same way, would I say anybody is a hybrid? No. I think it would be more likely that, you know, people are those extraordinary individuals are tuned, their consciousness is tuned to a channel that many of us do not operate on, or tuned to a frequency we do not operate in. And, it might be as simple as that for as complicated as that is.
Very good. Well, I
Well, like
really,
I got the Total Disclosure fan club here too. I love
yes,
this crossover, Hannibal, right?
yeah. Well, it's your wife
Crossover shows,
shared it.
crossover wrestling, UFOs. This is what it's all about, man. There's
Well,
nothing else like this.
thanks to those total disclosure people for sharing that out. I appreciate it. Gene, I'll let you close this off with whatever you want. Can you close this off in a Roddy Piper
Yeah.
impression?
Which I do. What was it? What was the old one? Uh,
Just when you
oh,
think I got
this
all
is a
the
good one. This is a
answers.
good one, right? You get it up. So just when you think you know all the answers, I change the question.